Hello, and today I'm going to be doing a brief history, a brief video on the history of England. I should say do it live in case anyone has any questions on England that they want to ask. But I'm going to start from the beginning. So, Roman times. So, there's this common misconception that the Celts were only in England. When they were not, they were just focused mainly in England because they had nowhere else to live. Now, there were lots of tribes of Celts, and they didn't originate from England either, but they were just around Europe. They were called the Celts because of their language that they spoke. It was the type of language was Celtic. But there were more than one Celtic languages, like the Allobroges tribe just above Massalia, just west of Italy. Oh, hello there. And when the Romans first invaded, there was the issue of, not being able to defend themselves because they only had light armor and short pointy sticks and knives and just bows and arrows, whereas the Romans would have had legionnaire swords, like praetorian shields. They would have had vigilettes, maybe probably not really any of them. And then when they first invaded, they didn't really do much to the people themselves. They just let them live, and they just went about their conquering until they got north to Scotland, where they were fully roadblocked by the Picts and their mountainous combat. So they fell back and built Hadrian's Wall, which falls quite a few hundred years later. It was just basically a hill with some stones to build a slight wall, and it was essentially just there to stop traders from getting by without paying the tax. So they'd just have to pay the tax and then go on there. And it was, if anyone really tried to attack, it would just fall. Then later on, when the Romans left, the Anglo-Saxons invaded the country, and the Britons could not fight off them, so they then colonized the area into the factions of Wessex down south, with London and pretty much everything east and south of London. And then slightly west of that, you had Essex, Sussex, and Kent, which were all independent. Then is slightly so that little scoop in England, just you know what it is. You can see it on a map. It's like this outdome thing that goes in on the eastern side of England. That was East Anglia. Then right in the slap bang middle of England, you had Mercia, and then in modern day Wales, at the time it was called Gwynedd, until about 1200 AD, and then north of that you had Northumbria, the Kingdom of Northumbria, and Alba, and you also had the Gaelic kingdoms in Ireland, which got hit hard by the Vikings, which brings me now to the Vikings. The Vikings. So we all know how they invaded England, but they didn't just invade England, they also invaded Francia too. So France and the Slavs, so the Polish, essentially that's what the Slavs are. And they attacked everywhere really, and there were lots of smaller kingdoms in Norway and Sweden, but Denmark was quite one big country for a lot of the time, and they eventually chipped away at places like York because it was in Northumbria, where a lot of the monasteries that were attacked were, which automatically gave them more weakness because they were on the coast. The Gaelic kingdoms were absolutely spent, and Wessex, under King Alfred, was the last Anglo-Saxon kingdom to stay, or left over. Then eventually, a couple of hundred years later, the Anglo-Saxons managed to conquer back against the Vikings from Wessex and conquer England again. It's still not fully united, And then the Normans invade. And everyone knows how that goes. They end up killing the Anglo-Saxon king and conquer England and York, but they don't fully unite the kingdom until quite a lot later on. They unify the country, and then of course you have a lot of things like the 100 Years' War, just lots of Spain wars, and you have like the First Crusade with the Kingdom of Jerusalem, Principality of Antioch against things like Saladin and the Mamluks of Egypt. And then go on further, so like the Third Crusade, which First, Second, and Third Crusade happened actually very close together. Richard III dies. Does he die again? No, I don't think he. No, he doesn't die there. He doesn't die there. He comes back, and then he dies in the War of the Roses, the English Civil War, and then of course you've got things like Henry Tudor and that. Well, later on down the line, and then you eventually have the what's it called again? I forgot the name. The English Civil War. I'll just call it that for now. Between Oliver Cromwell and the Royalists, which led to nowadays Parliament and the democracy in England. Then, well, after that, you had, well, during the time of the War of the Roses, that they were colonies in America. Like, well, I'm pretty sure those Americans out there are going to be like, want to tell them that the beloved New York City wasn't even colonized by English people. It was built by the Dutch. It was called New Amsterdam. English did that great good thing of conquering American places and then renamed it to New York because, everything has to have new than an English city name after it. Then, of course, later on you had more conquering. Yeah, that yellow glare is from the sun. It does like to set at about 6 o'clock for some reason. Then you have later on, when I say later on, I'm literally talking about the 1600s now, with the shipping around of that end of the 100 Years' War, and Joan of Arc's uniting in France for the first time in a very long time, when Caen is fully united and Brittany is liberated from England, and you had things like the East India Company owning an entire country, India, a company, yes, and lots of African colonization too, which really didn't go well for the colonizers eventually. Now we're getting on the late 1800s. Well, I'll just go mid 17 to late 1800s, where you had the Napoleonic Wars and Lord Nelson and the Crimean Wars. And then you eventually get to World War One, where the British just sent over a stupid number of troops because, the French had mobilized 2 million men in World War Two, and the British only sent over 200,000. And in World War One, it was pretty similar. The French had lots and lots of men, and the British just only sent over a few here and there. It ended up not going so well for the British, as they had to propaganda their way into getting people to join the army and help them out overseas. And you have things like after the war, you had like revolutions worldwide in African countries. France was the reason of decolonization in Africa because of the way they treated the people there. You had revolutions in like India. You had the Suez Canal disaster. The Cold War. I'm not really going to go into too much detail now because I can go into a lot more detail in other videos which are more specifically designed for it. In the 1970s, you have like the Iraq War, the 6-day siege on the Iranian embassy. Then, well, talking about modern day, you have things like Afghanistan, and, well, can't really give any more examples. Well, you could say the Iraq-Iran War, because that was 2003. And, well, I can see no one else has really got any questions right now, so that'll be it. See ya. See you until next time.